Okay, we're going to start with Jared Basler, the godfather of Granny Flats, who does amazing updates every month at the ADU Coalition. And Jared, there's been a huge difference since last year's conference on regulations and policies through 2020. What are the big things that happened?
So the real big thing that happened was that we actually got the guidance that we were looking for from the state. So part of the big changes that happened last year that we were super excited about between pandemic and just everything going on in 2020, a lot of it took longer to implement than we would have really liked it to. So we now have a handbook from the state that's put out by Department of Housing and Community Development. And that's a really good, does a great job at setting what the state's interpretation of the law is. And so the reason this is important is because over the past several years, we've had to do so much back and forth with cities on what does the law mean. And so now there's an actual quasi-enforceable interpretation from the state on the state law. So that's been kind of one of the biggest things that we've seen this year. There's been some other smaller things that just kind of went into effect a couple of days ago. So we had a AB 3182 that was passed and went into law. It really kind of clarifies some minor things in the state law that were things that certain cities argued back and forth over. So there are things that they needed to clarify rather than making sweeping changes. And so one of those is that they are now clarifying that an ADU and a JADU can go on a lot regardless of how the ADU goes on there. So before it was only that you could do a detached ADU and a JADU that's inside the existing primary. Now you can actually have an ADU, a JADU, and a single family home all in the same structure. So it opens up more opportunities and clarifies things that were in the intent in the first place. And then it also kind of some of the other small things that it clarifies. It just clarifies where these can go and basically anywhere where the zoning allows for single family or multifamily uses.
So are you seeing cities dragging their feet in implementing this anymore? Since the handbook came out?
So I think that the handbook has provided a lot of, given us the evidence we need. I wouldn't say that cities are dragging their feet. I would say that they're not aware or their individual reviewers are not aware. It's not something that is, we're seeing a ton of cities that are just outright pushing back. It's more of a understanding issue. So I think that's what the handbook does more than anything. And so having that resource available to provide them is a really great tool.
Are you seeing any legislative initiatives or changes coming up for this year or for the foreseeable future that really will make an impact on homeowners or investors?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that happened obviously in 2020 was looking at housing, looking at housing equity, and really understanding there's certainly things that we think are going to be coming on the horizon. I think that there's a lot of focus on kind of rebuilding our economy back to what it was. And so I don't think there's going to be a lot of housing specific or ADU specific legislation coming through this year. But there are certain things that we'll be working on with regulatory bodies and other ways to kind of help improve things, some of those kind of roadblocks that come up along the way. Ultimately, I think, the whole idea is, we removed the zoning hurdle, which was that you can't build this. And by removing that hurdle, we now see the other hurdles that are in the way. So it's a good thing that we're seeing those, and it's even easier now to have something to check those against to make sure that they're things that are within state law or not in state law. So I think that moving forward is continuing to identify those hurdles and remove them where we can. And there is quite a bit of compromise that we have to do on this, because ultimately it's not just I can build whatever I want. We still have to, the building officials, the fire officials still get to, and for good reason, determine the, safety and, the fire and life safety of the building.
So are you seeing turn times go down? I mean, they still have to do the review of the actual site property. It's not like you're seeing we're never going to see over the counter approvals per se. They're still going to do all that stuff, correct?
Yeah, well, the way I'll put it is we see more streamlining on the processes that are used to evaluate these projects. There are certain ways that you can speed those up. It's less, I think, about city processes and more about having a good set of drawings. And ultimately, the great set of drawings for the building and ADU itself is half of it. The rest of it's the site. So, I mean, there's nothing coming down the pike, and there's no processes that I see that are going to remove the need to understand how this sits on your land and how it impacts it.
Yeah, and that's been a big lesson this year too, with the so-called templated projects. We've learned a lot that they really aren't templates. They have to be adjusted, right, for the specific property. It almost doesn't really count per se.
Yeah, I mean, again, the building itself is only half the project. They don't sit in the middle of the air. They still have to connect to water, sewer, utilities, and so there's always going to be reviews that are needed for the actual the site itself.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there may be instances where there's more opportunity to streamline some of those. And I think cities are doing what they can. But there's, it's really a two-sided issue. It's not just that we have a great template design with all the drawings ready to go and go pull your permit. You still need to show the property.
We've also seen another major trend this year of cities experimenting with ADU laws and actually increasing, especially those cities where as you know, the state is demanding that to increase overall housing, and cities have quotas per se. So those cities with tougher quotas, like a San Diego, which has really been the ADU Coalition's kind of guinea pig, have really been experimenting with new policies. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's so many different housing policies that go into effect that that will impact a city's willingness to try new things, and so I think we see a lot of cities that are willing to kind of step out and try some new ideas. I'm actually really glad that we haven't seen everybody just jumping onto a bandwagon, but we actually see that experimentation, because what that really tells me is that we're looking for results. We're not looking for somebody else did it and I'm just going to point at them. We're looking at what's best for my city and what will work in our environment.
Absolutely. Cities like not just San Diego, but Pasadena, San Jose, up and down the state. Conversely, whenever I get somebody from certain cities like Chula Vista, oh my gosh, we got an impact fee. Yes, I name names. I just know that
you're naming names. It's okay. I did it a couple years ago with Encinitas, and that's fine.
Yeah. So it's really important, in terms of if you're an investor or if you're a homeowner, know where you're investing and getting into.
One thing that I've seen that's maybe a little frustrating is that the reviews in cities needing to be expedited have led to some interesting problems with timing. So, for instance, the city knows that they have to turn these around in a certain amount of time. It's 60 days, but that's not important now. They know they have to turn around in a certain time that they typically don't do it in. And so they want to make sure that they are crossing their T's and dotting their I's. And so what we've seen, National City is one of them. The county is another one. But they are requiring you to have your solar package, your solar drawings, and your solar contractor picked out and ready to go at the same time as your building permit.
Wow.
And so when we really think about that, it's a it takes, it jumps ahead a few steps because, when we're pulling a permit for ADU, the homeowners then typically taking that and bidding it out to contractors. So we wouldn't necessarily have a contractor in place. And again, when we talk about these policies, we also want to look at the parity in the marketplace. So one of the biggest things when we talk about how that impacts things is it does provide a advantage to certain types of projects. So something that's a design build or something that's getting run strictly by a contractor has an advantage in that instance because they already have those relationships and they already have those people picked out. So we want to create parity in the processes and parity in the marketplace. And so those kinds of things are a concern, and they're things that we're looking at how we can fix.
Well, I do see it from my perspective. I do think that there's been some real efficiency gain, though, from contractors who specialize in ADUs because they do know who their solar guy is. They do have their subs ready to go. Some of them have even, are basically buying wholesale the products because they know the stuff they need. And I think, and they get their permits through a lot faster than people do.
Well, and what I think is the point is that there's a couple of different standard processes for how we permit projects.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a traditional design bid build where the project is competitively bid out. And then there's also design build where it's a firm that's doing all of the work. And so there's what it does is, it shifts the advantage to one side as opposed to it being a fair and open process for everyone.
Got it.
And so that's kind of where I was getting at. We want to make sure that homeowners are being able to take advantage of these opportunities. And I think that keeping that parity in the marketplace has been a goal of the ADU Coalition since day one. And I think it's something we continue to focus on.
Yeah. Anything else happening on the permitting and policy side from your perspective?
Well, I mean, almost everything's digital now. And that's good and bad because it means that people, we're using less paper. We're starting to get some more processes that seem to make sense. But we're also seeing reviewers that aren't in the office, reviewers that are not as engaged with their teams as they were previously. So there's some, potentially education gaps there from reviewer to reviewer. And the other side of that is that when we talk about how these processes are changing, one of the biggest things that we see as a hindrance in almost all jurisdictions now is that they're requiring us to wait to resubmit to individual departments until everything is back. And so when we talk about how long they have to actually work through these projects, they're wasting a lot of their state given time just because they won't let us turn stuff back in. Yeah. We could actually get projects done a lot quicker if we were able to respond back to each department individually.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think it's, when the process is fully digital, it makes it really hard. You can't have a conversation and work stuff out, get to know you and develop some rapport and partnership with the permit folks. It's just a lot easier to just say no, and there you go. Good. We've seen, conversely, there's been huge updates this year in the finance world as the agencies like Fannie Mae has made tremendous strides. We saw a major research paper by Freddie Mac looking at ADU growth from the MLS perspective. Now, keep in mind, Fannie had not tracked ADUs through their appraisal process. In March, they changed the appraisal form to actually start to track ADUs. Before, it really wasn't very well tracked, but Freddie found a way around it, looking at it from MLS data. and was seeing a 6 to 8% year-over-year growth in ADUs. And the real question, and it's a valid question for them, is do ADUs create rental income? Does it create greater financial resiliency in down economic times? And I think we all think naturally yes, but they have to have data to prove that. So we've seen improvements there, and in September they issued a major announcement for both appraisers, telling them, talk to realtors about homes with ADUs for sale right now, and look at that as a comparable sale. Keep in mind, appraisers are not allowed to compare ADUs to duplexes. And Dennis Desai from the Appraisal Institute will talk about that. So we've seen markets out there where an appraiser will literally give a $0 value to an ADU. Well, that doesn't make any sense. We did it. Loan Depot did a huge partnership with the Appraisal Institute, which I organized, and we've to train, and we have special sub-panels of renovation appraisals. And once the appraisals get that training from Dennis and the Appraisal Institute, we see a massive increase in appraisal value and projects getting approved. So that's been a huge difference. The other major difference is that Fannie is now allowing HUD certified homes, i.e. manufactured homes, to be considered for an ADU in a renovation loan. That's a massive change. Previously, only stick-built homes could be considered in construction renovation loans as ADUs. It does not include prefab homes. And that's an interesting question, because with the massive growth in prefab units, I can't finance those as renovation loans. And in California, 85% of ADU projects will be a renovation loan, not a HELOC or a cash out refinance. So we'll see where that goes. And the question becomes, if they choose that, who would certify that? How do they validate that a prefab house is fully inspected, it's solid for fire? You've talked about fire, habitability, livability, all the other usual housing codes. So it will be a good forthcoming question. But I think the real excitement in the air is twofold. Look at Fannie Mae considering treating ADUs like a duplex. We're hoping they'll make that final leap to that, so that they can factor in future rental income in qualifying people for it, but also that appraisers can factor in rental income. That would be the absolute game changer, allowing so many more people to be able to qualify for to finance ADUs with no cash out of pocket, essentially. And then, of course, grants from nonprofits and the California Financing Authority are considering new grant processes. They've been experimenting this year with different approaches. And I think at our April 24th event coming up with the ADU Coalition, Tim Sue from CalHAFA will have some really great announcements, I'm hoping, for new grants throughout California for ADU projects. So I'm excited.
Great. Meredith, speaking about the kind of changes in the financial space and how they're looking at these units, you mentioned that they are going to be looking at these more like duplexes. And that gets to an interesting question where, it's not going to affect a lot of homeowners, but we have traditional single family financing for 1 to 4 units, and then we have commercial financing for 5+. Is that kind of determination, as looking at it more as duplexes, is that going to help kind of clarify that question so we don't have so much back and forth on that answer?
That's a great question, because so I'm hoping we get that clarification. I don't know what their answer is going to be. At the moment, we can only finance up to 4 units and 1 ADU per property. And I know that the cities are allowing multiple ADUs on multifamily properties. So a 4 unit, I think, can technically have 2 ADUs.
Yeah, so a duplex, triplex, quad can have an additional 2 detached ADUs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't finance those. And I have clients who are converting, like they'll have a multifamily condo project, garages, and they'll convert all 4 garages, so 8 units. It's technically residential and permitted as such, but I can't finance that. So I'm hoping Fannie will resolve that. It's a great question.
Yeah.
I think that's all for policy updates since to catch everybody up for next year. And with that, we're going to talk about what kind of opportunities this means for us.